You're listening to In Good Health, the trusted news source for medicine, science, and technology. I'm Elizabeth Westfield.
I'm Mayan Vasta Betancourt.
And I'm Greg Johnson. This week, the nonprofit working to reduce drug overdose deaths.
I saw a lot of people dying from opioid overdose. It's completely preventable, and their access to medication and interventional tools that could save their life wasn't there.
But first, the FDA ruling that's changing treatment options for patients with hypothyroidism.
It doesn't have FDA approval because it precedes the FDA. It's been around to treat patients since before the FDA was even created.
All that and more this week on In Good Health. The thyroid is something that's become an online catch-all word for various health issues, but not many people understand its actual function. This gland sits in the front of the neck, secreting hormones to regulate everything from metabolism to breathing to brain development, and that's just to name a few. As you can imagine, having a problem with your thyroid can cause a whole host of issues. Dr. Ann Coppola says the most common culprit is called hypothyroidism, which is when the gland isn't making enough thyroid hormone.
It can be due to inflammation of the thyroid from something called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. That is an autoimmune condition generally inherited. It can also be due to removal of the thyroid. Say someone has thyroid cancer, their thyroid nodules, or radiation treatment to the neck for a cancer that someone had, years ago for something else. So anything that can cause destruction of the thyroid gland can lead to hypothyroidism.
Coppola is a professor of medicine in the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. Thyroid hormone is made up by the two hormones T4 and T3. But before we knew anything about these specifics, doctors in the 1890s realized that they could treat the condition by giving patients ground-up sheep thyroid glands.
And so for years, that was what was available. It ultimately transitioned to pig thyroid, but it was ground-up thyroid glands.
It doesn't have FDA approval because it precedes the FDA. It's been around to treat patients since before the FDA was even created. So sometimes those medications are called grandfathered in because they've been around since before the FDA approval process was required for medications.
That's Tennille Davis, Chief Advocacy Officer for the Alliance for Pharmacy Compounding. This ground-up pig thyroid is called desiccated thyroid extract, or DTE. And though some patients still use it today, it's no longer the first choice for treatment. Once scientists realized that DTE worked because of the two hormones, T4 and T3, they created synthetic forms of these hormones, which is what most patients use today.
It was also recognized that T4 is converted to T3 just by plucking off a single iodine in the periphery in certain tissues so that the body can make its own T3. And even in a normal person, about 80% of the circulating T3 is made by peripheral, what we call deiodination. And that's one of the things that we like about it. And we know that the body can make its own T3 from the T4. And that part of it is still absolutely regulated by the body, even in hypothyroidism. It's separate from what's going on in the thyroid.
Because of this, Coppola says many patients only take synthetic T4 and let their bodies naturally convert some of it to T3.
What we try to do is keep people on the minimum dose of thyroid medication they need so that their bodies can regulate. That's actually the more natural way to do it, is to say, okay, we're going to let your body do everything you can, and we'll only supplement it if it needs a little help.
Coppola says most doctors prescribe levothyroxine, which is the recommended first-line therapy for hypothyroidism. However, a small percentage of patients are still taking DTE.
It's really people who are maybe unhappy on levothyroxine who find someone who say, well, I'm going to have you try this and see if it helps. Or other people from the very start, they're told this is natural and you should take it. And what's interesting about this and this whole natural premise is that excipients, the things that are put into the pill to make it a pill and to give it stability over time, those are used in these desiccated thyroid extracts. So it has kind of preservatives in there and fillers and things to help it get absorbed, just like the levothyroxine products do. And so that's where this natural claim doesn't hold as much water as you would want it to, because there are still other things, additives, that are in these pills that are in fact necessary to have a longer shelf life.
Still, Davis says the few people who take DTE feel a big difference with the drug.
I'm a thyroid patient. I don't take animal thyroid. I take synthetic T3 and T4. So I'm not pushing for people to be on that as like a first line treatment by any means. But as a real pharmacist, I really have seen patients where it's made a huge difference in their lives. So it's a very small percentage that take these animal thyroid products, but the ones that take them are really passionate about the therapy and how much it's made a difference in their lives.
Davis says that there's no clear evidence on why some patients respond better to DTE over synthetic hormones, but she's seen many people make the switch and feel like a new person in just a few weeks. But not long from now, these patients won't be able to get their usual prescription of DTE. In August, the FDA sent letters to manufacturers and distributors of unapproved animal-derived thyroid medications that states these products will no longer be allowed for commercial use. The FDA is concerned with the safety and effectiveness of these medications, which Coppola says is partly due to how DTE is dosed. While the synthetic products are dosed in micrograms, DTE is prepared differently.
The way that the desiccated thyroid extracts are dosed is based on a really old approach. They're in grains. And a grain is technically 64.7 milligrams, and it's based on literally how much a grain of barley weighs. So back in the day when there were apothecaries, they would dispense certain medications. Aspirin used to be one of them. 5 grains was the 325 milligrams. And this is held over so that in some cases they're actually considered to be 60 micrograms and others 65 micrograms. But the desiccated thyroid extract is in grains. And what happens is in each grain, there is 38 micrograms of T4 and 9 micrograms of T3, and then 59 milligrams. So there's a difference between micrograms and milligrams, 59 milligrams of all the other stuff that was in the pig's thyroid.
The FDA is concerned that the additional biological matter from the pig increases the risk of impurities in the drug, and that this older process leads to inconsistent dosing.
And we do know how much is in a grain. That part is somewhat standardized. But what the FDA was really concerned about is how do you know in each of these grains that these patients are taking, how much is actually in there, and is it standardized from batch to batch and from manufacturer to manufacturer? And that's really what the question is.
Thyroid hormone replacement medications need to be dosed very carefully for each patient, because even slight variations can make a difference in how well it works and the side effects patients can experience.
Treatment of hypothyroidism has what we call a narrow therapeutic window. It's almost like Goldilocks. Too much is bad, too little is bad, just right is just right. And so we need to make sure that what's in our pills is what's in the pill, because we're making adjustments for people. And if the lot-to-lot variability is an extra factor in there, we can't do a good job.
In addition to the batch-to-batch concerns, Coppola says the concentration of T4 and T3 is different in DTE than synthetic hormones. DTE has higher amounts of T3, which means that if a patient is taking the same amount of T4 that's in the synthetic product, they're getting much more T3.
T3 is somewhat of a stimulant, right? That's how we think about thyroid hormone. And it can overstimulate your heart, and it can overstimulate bone turnover in your bones. And it may not be so good in the long term for your brain. And we know this from studies of people who endogenously make too much T3. There are hyperthyroidism where you make a little too much T4 and some people make a little too much T3. And in those cases, when you look long term, you can see that there are potential adverse effects.
Coppola thinks that the stimulating effects of extra T3 is why some patients report feeling better on DTE, but she says it doesn't necessarily mean that the condition is being properly treated.
You may feel a little like, okay, but then your body is going to adapt and try to get your levels and get your body back to what it would have normally been. So you don't feel that anymore. And they say, hey, I don't feel as good anymore. And so then the person says, well, you just need more. So you give them more and you feel a little bit better again, but then you don't feel it. And over time, what happens is there's this adaptation process that happens until it can't anymore. But people often end up on what equivalently would be considered very high doses of these preparations because of that.
A fix to this extra T3 would be compounding, a pharmaceutical process that customizes medications for patients. Compounding pharmacists could adjust the levels of T4 and T3 in each dose depending on what the patient needs. However, this new decision by the FDA has made that impossible. Part of the FDA's response involves a reclassification of a protein in animal thyroid glands that holds the T3 and T4 hormones together. It's been reclassified as a biologic product, which is a category that's not allowed to be compounded.
It comes from a rule that went into effect in 2020 I don't think the purpose of the rule was to stop compounding of biologics. I think the purpose of the rule was to improve access to other manufacturers of insulin. But one of the kind of side effects of the rule is that it prevented compounding. And, granted, biologics are more complicated than traditional small molecule drugs. I can see definitely that there could be potentially more risk.
But Davis argues that DTE shouldn't be in that category.
We are in the process of creating a citizens petition to the FDA, so they will have to respond to that at some point. We have lots of patients sending in letters to the FDA asking for them to not regulate this medication as a biologic to essentially reverse their decision.
But since the original ruling still stands, the FDA has instructed physicians to transition their patients using DTE over to synthetic products. The industry has been given a 1-year grace period before unapproved animal-derived thyroid products are prohibited.
And it's not straightforward, honestly. We don't have standard algorithms for how to do it. It hasn't been studied. Anecdotally, I've done it in practice before, but we look at the thyroid levels. Luckily, we're able to measure them in the blood, but what we're not necessarily able to see is the other types of adaptations that the body may have happened at the level of these receptors that the thyroid hormones bind to. When there's too much around, they downregulate so that the body's not overstimulated as well. So if you suddenly take that away, you have to give time for the body to readapt and kind of upregulate things and get those deionases going again that weren't working. Like, you can't just stop and switch. Often you have to kind of titrate them and adjust them back.
Which Coppola has successfully done before, and hopefully there are guidelines released for other physicians who don't have similar clinical experience. You can find more information about Dr. Ann Coppola, Neil Davis, and all of our guests on our website, ingoodhealthpodcast.org. For more behind the scenes, follow In Good Health Pod on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farah. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. I'm Elizabeth Westfield.
Coming up, how the public can stop fentanyl-related overdose deaths when In Good Health returns. Short rhymes and phrases have proven to be a great tactic to help us remember how to act in dangerous situations. Whether we're on fire or approached by a bear while hiking, these cues have prepared us to stay alive. But we may not be focusing our efforts on the most pressing issue. Even with fentanyl-related overdoses being the top cause of adult deaths, how many of us truly know what to do in the event of an overdose?
I saw a lot of people dying from opioid overdose. It's completely preventable, and their access to medication and interventional tools that could save their life wasn't there.
That's Theo Kraswicki, founder and CEO of End Overdose, a nonprofit that provides education and medical intervention for drug-related overdoses. Kraswicki, who's been sober for 15 years, started the organization in 2018.
I used to just walk to methadone clinics around LA, and I used to just train them to use naloxone. And then that turned into training people at drug treatment centers. Then that turned heavily into like the nightlife scene, and it just kind of grew from there.
Kraswicki's also a full-time firefighter paramedic, which means he's no stranger to our nation's drug epidemic.
I work in downtown LA, and we go on like 6 overdoses a day. The assessment that you take and the steps that you follow to like reverse an opioid overdose are relatively straightforward. For me, I wanted to make sure that people had that information more than the medication, more than anything else, that they had the information available to them with the click of a button that they could save somebody's life if they needed to.
Which is what inspired End Overdose. The organization started out training around 100 people each month, then magnified its reach during the pandemic.
Now we train 6,000 people a month online, and then we train 4,000 people in person, not including like our 13 college groups that all conduct their own trainings on campus. My goal is to make sure that every single person in this country has access to this training and has taken it. Just in the same way that the American Heart Association really pushed CPR, I think we need to push this the same way.
Krzyzewski knows he has a limited window of attention to get the most important information across, so he focuses on the 3 signs of an overdose.
Our training is real simple. It talks about the opioid overdose triad, which is pinpoint pupils, respiratory depression, and decreased level of consciousness, just like a quick signs and symptoms for you to really hold on to something. So if I can get you to identify and I can get you to respond, we did it. That's the biggest thing. And the biggest thing that I try and reinforce is you making the decision to act, right? You making the decision and the choice to respond, right? Because the thing that kills people the most is somebody, they see something looks weird, they see something looks wrong, but they just doesn't click in their mind. They're like, I don't really want to get involved. Maybe it's not, right? Maybe that person's just trying, I don't need to deal with this, right? And that can cost someone their life.
Of the 3 telltale signs, Krzyzewski says looking for the pinpoint pupils may be your best option to figure out if someone has overdosed on opioids.
You can lift up the eyelid, you can shine the light into their eyes, and if it remains like this tiny, tiny little pinpoint, man, that's an opioid overdose. And the medicine that you would use to help reverse you in that opioid overdose, it's not going to have any side effect if you use it on somebody that's just like drunk.
This medication is called naloxone. And though paramedics like Krzyzewski deliver it directly into a person's vein, that's not an option for those of us who aren't medically trained. Instead, 2 other options have been created that anyone can administer. Intranasal is delivered through the nose, and intramuscular is shot directly into a muscle.
Intramuscular kind of sounds scary, right? Because you have to use a needle, but it's really not that hard at all. People that use an EpiPen constantly are doing this all the time. It's the same type of principle. You would drop the medicine. It's already pre-dosed for you. So you just pull up all the fluid that's in a vial and you would inject it into like a large muscle, like a hamstring or a glute or a quad or like the deltoid on your shoulder. And it should work relatively quickly, like in less than 10 minutes. The way that's the most popular is intranasal, right? Where you could take a dose of like Cloxato or Narcan, you could put it into their nostril, depress a plunger, and the medicine will get absorbed through capillary membranes and taken up into the bloodstream.
The main issue with an opioid overdose is that it messes with the brain's ability to communicate with your lungs. Naloxone reverses an overdose by blocking the effects of the opioids and restoring a person's breathing. But if you don't have naloxone, what else can you do?
If that person gets oxygen, their outcome is going to be great. If you can rescue breathe for that person, which is 1 breath every 5 seconds, and you don't have to inflate them like a balloon, right? You just kind of lock lips with this person and just give them an exhale every time you need one just to see their chest rise up a little bit. Don't worry, you won't hurt them, right? You can save their life. If that's the only thing that you did, they had a pulse, they just needed oxygen, you rescue breathe until a paramedic arrived, like you would save their life.
But harm reduction isn't only about being on defense. Fentanyl test strips offer a proactive way to prevent an overdose. Unfortunately, they're not foolproof.
One of the problems with fentanyl test strips is they don't test for every analog of fentanyl, which is the big thing that people are really concerned with. They make new analogs all the time, so it's not a foolproof thing. The important thing with them, though, is that for all those kind of like big encashments in those gross areas, drugs aren't regulated by the FDA. No one's like batch testing for purity. It could just be Dan, just like, yeah, it looks good, right? They're really easy to use, right? It's just a dipstick.
All you need is 10 milligrams of the drug and about 15 milligrams of water. Mix both together, leave the test strip in the solution for 15 seconds, and then you'll be able to see if there's fentanyl present. And though these test strips and other strategies have grown in popularity, there's been vocal pushback against harm reduction in general. Some argue that we're just further enabling drug use, a sentiment Krzyzewski says is reasonable but not completely accurate. So while we can't force people to stop their drug use, we can help keep them alive. Unfortunately, Krzyzewski says the solutions aren't as well known as they should be.
It shouldn't be more challenging for you to get the information on how to save a life and the medicine that could reverse an opioid than it is for you to actually get that poison that's killing everybody, right? That's insane. You should be able to get naloxone right now with a click of a button. It should be way easier for you to get. And that's what our goal is, right? It should be as easy as you clicking a button to get fentanyl test strips, right? Because you're consciously making the decision, hey, I just want to be prepared for this very potential crisis in the world that we live in now.
Which is why the End Overdose website offers test strips and naloxone that will be delivered straight to your door.
If you live in LA, we'll come to your facilities, we'll train all of your people, we'll give it to you for free. And we make it as accessible as possible because the reality is you should have it easier than the thing that could kill you.
Krzyzewicki says the nonprofit has big plans for the future, but their first mission is making the education and life-saving medicine accessible to everyone. You can get all of the services on their website, endoverdose.net. You can find more information about Theo Krzyzewicki and all of our guests on our website, ingoodhealthpodcast.org. For more behind the scenes, follow In Good Health Pod on Facebook, Instagram, and X. This segment originally aired in December 2022. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farah. Our production manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Greg Johnson.
In Good Health returns in just a moment.
Medical notes this week. Are sound waves the next big thing in cancer treatment? Chemotherapy has long been the standard option, but its side effects can be just as devastating for the patient as the cancer. Instead, new research in the journal Chemical Science reveals how to make this treatment more precise through using ultrasound waves. When ultrasound is applied over the cancerous area, it activates the chemo just in that one spot. Researchers believe this approach could greatly minimize the damaging effects of chemotherapy. Tackle football isn't as kid-friendly as you think. Adults who began playing the sport at an early age may have less white matter in their brain, which accounts for nearly half of the human brain's volume. It's necessary for communication between cells, and a depletion of it can lead to cognitive and behavioral problems later in life. The study, published in Brain Communications, shows a cumulative risk, meaning that the longer you play, the higher your risk for brain injury becomes. Why you may want to spend more time on your phone. Researchers are looking at creating an app that passively collects user data as a tool to assess mental health. A paper published in JAMA Network Open reveals that it's possible to link a user's online behaviors with both specific and non-specific symptoms relating to mental health conditions. While this won't be able to replace treatment, it will help clinicians make better recommendations. And finally, light therapy could mend your heart. Research in the journal Lasers in Surgery and Medicine shows improved heart functioning in mice when exposed to photobiomodulation therapy. The mice received low-dose light therapy for 2 minutes, 5 days a week. Scientists believe it affects inflammation, immune system functions, and stem cell activity. And that's Medical Notes this week. I'm Mayan Vasta Betancourt.
Thank you for joining us this week and every week as we break down the science stories you need to know. You can find all of our past segments and guests on our website at ingoodhealthpodcast.org or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and X for more behind-the-scenes content. Tune in next week for another edition of In Good Health.